Okay, this is the third dot point for ecosystems at risk. The importance of ecosystem management and protection. And really what we're looking at here is two things. Let me get that started there. Looking at management and protection, why it's important. And the reason it's important are for all of these factors here. Ecosystems are vitally important for the proper functioning of life on Earth, which we've already looked at for many range of reasons. Humans need to manage and protect these ecosystems. We need to protect them to maintain the genetic diversity of our planet, and then for a whole range of other values. The utility value, the intrinsic value, the heritage value, and then also at the end we're going to look at lastly ecosystems being managed and protected because we do need to allow natural change to proceed. We need to allow the ecosystems to function as they would normally, as they would without us. So let's sort of delve into each of them. Look, as I've said already, you've got to be very much aware of the past dot points. This dot point here definitely links on to ecosystem functioning, biophysical interactions and functioning, also to vulnerability and resilience, and then it also will link on to the dot point coming up on management, both contemporary and traditional. So really important for all students to be aware of the context of the dot point, where it sits as well. Alright, so let's start with the first one, the maintenance of genetic diversity. So, for this point we're interested in genetic diversity itself. I guess it's an aspect of biodiversity in a way, but we're focusing on the genetic level, and obviously the greater the level of biodiversity, the greater there is going to be of genetic diversity. Ecosystems that have a large diversity in the genetically are going to be less vulnerable, more resilient to stress, and therefore greater for or easier to manage and easier to protect. It's in humans' interest to maintain this genetic diversity, and it's in the ecosystem's interest to maintain the genetic diversity. All right, let's get to the utility value. The utility value, we're looking at a financial, a usefulness value for humans, and really we're looking at, well, why would humans want to manage and protect an ecosystem for utility? It's for the use that we can get out of the ecosystem, for the products and the services that we can use. So we can talk about things like being able to get rubber from trees, foods, oils from plants and ecosystems. We can talk about getting medicines and pharmaceuticals out of ecosystems, just out of a small thing. We can also talk about things like ecotourism that we might look at, and a good example there might be the Great Barrier Reef, and how loss in diversity in the Great Barrier Reef is actually having an impact on the utility value of the reef, and how less and less people are able to enjoy the ecosystem, but it's also its utility value is diminishing as well. The intrinsic value refers to basically ecosystems just being valued because of their very existence, and humans have a need to protect and manage ecosystems purely because of their right to exist, regardless of any utility value. We'd look at the precautionary principle a bit later, but I think the precautionary principle in a utilitarian point of view would say that even if an ecosystem wasn't valued at a certain point in time, that it potentially could be, and therefore it would be another reason why you might protect it. We'll also look at intrinsic value here a little bit later when we start looking at contemporary and traditional management. But really, we're talking here, the aesthetic beauty of an ecosystem, and the values that we get out of these ecosystems. Heritage value should, we can look at national heritage, world heritage. There are a great deal of different heritage lists where ecosystems and sites have historic, scientific, social, as well as other spiritual and special value that we see need to be preserved for future generations. And so we need to protect ecosystems for their heritage value. Alright, needing to allow natural change to proceed. Ecosystems are valuable because they are needed to allow for the natural functioning. This here we're talking about humans managing, protecting ecosystems, but we also need to let nature do what nature does in order for our planet to survive. We talk about here the concept of eco-services, things such as pollination, insect control, flood mitigation, storm protection, all things that happen, for example, coastal sand dunes are a natural protection for storms, floodplains, wetlands, and natural measures for flood control. Bees, possums, bats, pollinating are all examples of ecosystems doing what they are designed to do, and are there to provide, I guess, some sort of eco-service. This part of the dot point, I think, can be used in a few different ways, though. You can look at this both positively and negatively, and we're going to do that in a moment when we look at some of the sample studies. So I'm going to link back to the sample studies that I looked at for vulnerability and resilience. I like being able to link back to vulnerability and resilience here. So the Tasmanian devil, here's a map here of the Tasmanian devils at the moment. There appear to be few devil facial tumour cases up in this little corner up here, whereas the bulk of the island has been infected. And really the question we'd be looking at here is, well, why do we need to manage and protect this ecosystem and this species within the ecosystem? I guess, genetic diversity would clearly come to mind. Without the devil, there's going to be a complete change in the functioning of the ecosystem, in the genetic diversity of the ecosystem. And then the other thing we'd maybe think about here is what I was talking about before, is what happens if we do allow natural change to occur? The natural change here being the facial tumour. If natural change is allowed to occur and the devil is no longer a part of this ecosystem, how will that impact on functioning? And I guess the answer to that, or the way we've answered that question, is that we've put in a whole range of management strategies to try and protect the devil so that natural functioning continues to occur because they're such a crucial part of that ecosystem. So that's another way to think about natural change. Mount St Helens, then the natural catastrophic event, is that volcano in the 1980s in Washington State. Had a huge impact, blew the best part of 400 metres of top of the mountain basically off. Had a huge impact on the ecosystem around, and this comes out of the National Geographic article that if you're using Mount St Helens, I'd encourage you to look at. Here's a picture here of Spirit Lake that was covered in old, blown trees and a whole range of other pyroclastic material. And really, once again, we're looking at, well, why would we need to manage and protect the ecosystem around Mount St Helens? And the heritage value certainly comes to mind, and the intrinsic value just to look at the landscape. There's great intrinsic worth in this landscape here. The Gulf of Mexico is a human-induced event and a catastrophic one. The well here, just in the south, in the Gulf of Mexico, south of Mississippi and Alabama, arguably, well, not even arguably, it is the largest oil spill, catastrophic event. The impacts are extremely widespread. We'd be looking at this and saying, well, why would we need to protect this? And there is a huge utility value. Obviously, there's a huge financial value in this ecosystem, not just in the oil, but great level of diversity in terms of what we use here. Large fishing industries, large wetlands, and also because of that, and it's a hugely rich area for genetic diversity as well. So another reason why we definitely need to be looking. I've got a photo here of some oil here that's crept into some of the lower trophic levels for the food chains, and then this is obviously you would link to functioning as well. So we'd be talking back there about that first dot point. Lastly, the world's oceans as ecosystems and the gradual human event of overfishing, and this also comes from another National Geographic article about where fish are caught, and it looks at the change here in between the 50s and the 90s, and basically where we see this intense fishing, and you can see there's just been a huge increase here, especially in these areas around Peru, around Africa as well. And really what we'd be thinking here is, well, why do we need to protect and manage fisheries around the world? And the utility value is clear. It's a huge food source for so many people, but also, once again, the maintenance of genetic diversity. If we remove these top predators, which is what we're fishing, then we get an abundance of other types of seafood and other types of life and species within the ocean, which changes the dynamic equilibrium and the functioning of that ecosystem. All right, final point. So I guess the next dot point we're going to start looking at management, both contemporary and traditional. We're going to talk about values and we'll be linking to all the other stuff we've looked at. All right, we'll see you then.